Hello! If you are confused about why I'm standing here in this gray leotard kind of thing, then you should go check out my two previous videos on the corset body. Those will give you a little bit of context. However, if you've already seen those two videos, then welcome back, and we're going to be doing a fitting today. Today's video is going to be focusing on how you fit a garment like this, and then I'm going to be going through all of the finishing, leading from like the fitting to the very end where you have nice finished garment a little bit more thoroughly than I did in my very first video where I showed like just the process of how I make this whole thing. But before we get started, I wanted to thank today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community where you can learn new skills and grow your creativity. If you are on my channel, you probably have heard of Bernadette Banner, but Bernadette has her own Skillshare original class on hand sewing. It's called Hand Sewing Basics, Work Wonders with Fabric, Needle, and Thread. And in this class, she goes through a lot of the basic stitches and how to make your stitches really nice and neat. So if you are someone who's not so into machine sewing, or you're just starting out, or if you just want to go back and get a refresher on how to make your hand sewing look really nice, this is a really good class for you to try out. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. This is also the introduction of a new project series. I'm going to be making Raven from Teen Titans. This is a special Raven design made by my friend Sunset Dragon. I worked with her to design this costume. Mostly I threw a bunch of reference images at her and she put them all together perfectly because she's an amazing artist. But I was mostly inspired by Terry Mugler for this. Terry Mugler has a really famous bodysuit, and that was really the inspiration for this costume. So I wanted to make something similar. The Terry Mugler bodysuit is a mesh leotard with a corset over top, and the corset is connected to leg girders. I wanted to do something a little bit different because I did want to make a corset body for this and not have to deal with a bunch of like shifting parts. First off, I just wanted to give like a good 360 view of how this all fits. I'm gonna hold my braids up like Pippi Longstocking, and like I'm very impressed with myself for how it fits in the butt. It fits like super well in the butt, so good job, past Minji. I am going to replace the zipper. I didn't have any that was the correct color, but I'm going to go out today and get a new zipper. It's wrinkling at the waist. That's normal because I don't have enough boning in this. I didn't put any boning on the seams in case I did need to like rip some apart. It's much easier to do my fitting if I don't have boning at the seams. If you are someone who needs like a really good visual aid though for when you're doing a fitting, then you should bone it as much as you would in the actual garment. This panel turned out so much lighter than the rest of them, so I'm going to replace that panel too. So the first thing that I want to check with this corset body, and what you want to do with basically any garment, is make sure that everything is in the correct place vertically. Because you could think that something is too tight, but maybe the waist of the garment is sitting up too high or too low, and that'll make everything feel too tight when it's not actually too tight. You can see that there's some wrinkling and buckling at the waist here. It goes all the way through the back pretty much, and that might mean that the back is maybe a little bit too long. To figure that out, I'm just gonna kind of smooth everything up and see where it lands once it's all smoothed up, because this is kind of going to emulate how it looks with boning. And I think that this is a little bit too long actually, because it kind of goes like way into my armpit. I'm going to make a note that I should lower this starting at kind of the middle point of this side front piece. I should lower it a little bit all the way through the back so that it's not going so far into my armpit. You just want to look for places where the fabric is wrinkling and buckling on itself. It's either too tight, or maybe the area that you're trying to put this in is too long for your body, so your body is too short for the garment, I guess. I don't know. Those are the main things that we need to look for first. And then the rest is just kind of refining the fit. You want to start from the sections that are too tight so that you can make sure it settles into the right place before you take in places that are too loose. The hips are definitely too tight on me. I had a lot of trouble getting the zipper up over my hips, which is not usually something that I deal with in clothing that I make because I leave a lot of space, and I'm not looking for compression around my hips. Mostly I'm looking for compression a little bit below my waist up to maybe a little bit above my underbust so I can get like a push-up effect. But I really don't want compression down here because it's, for one, not very comfortable, but also it's just not really the look that I'm going for. With the design that I'm making, I don't actually really need to adjust anything here because this is going to be so high cut that this is all going to get cut away. However, if I want to use this pattern in the future, I should do the adjustments properly. You can see that that was like really compressing my hips like quite a bit. I don't think I want to take anything from here because it seems like this is not constricting at all. Even like here, it's mostly this volume here, which is typically where I need to add more when I make clothing. Right, hopefully you guys can see that, but I've literally just pinned a square of fabric to this opening so that when I take this off, I am able to say like, this is exactly where the pins were, and I've got that taut, and I'll be able to add this much back into the pattern when I'm doing my alterations. So you can see that this has much more hip spring, like a much larger hip spring than this side does, because this is so compressed. Before I only had this seam popped open, so it was widening quite a bit. Now that I've gotten both of them, it's evenly distributing it a little bit more, so I can actually make this one a little bit smaller and make it so that these are kind of the same size. So that's another thing to note, is you never want to make your alterations just on one side. You want to make sure that if you're opening a seam, you want to do it on both sides. So I've got them both pinned in there, and if they're different, that's okay. I'll just kind of take the average of them, but that gives me a lot more space in the hips now. And that actually made this whole thing loosen up a little bit. So I think that it was pulling everything down just a tiny bit because it was having trouble like going higher, if that makes sense. Now that my waistline is sitting a little bit higher, this is extra in my armpit for one, but this is making everything else fit a little bit looser. So that was what I was talking about, where like if you don't have things on the right horizontal line, then things are just not going to fit correctly because they're not matching up to the measurements that you patterned for. So now that I have space in my hips, I can probably take in the waist and the rib cage a little bit more to get more of the dramatic like hip curve. I mentioned this in a previous video where you can only get so much reduction if you are also reducing your hips, but if you are leaving a lot of space for your hips, you can reduce a lot more in your waist because it's trying to compress everything a little bit less. You can just see behind me that I'm pinching everything shut a little bit, and I don't really want that much wiggle space, but then it gives more space for everything that I have underneath the bodysuit to shift around. So that's about 3/4, and I just like held the roller up and felt where it should fall. Pulling this all back also helps lift the bust quite a bit. So this is what it looked like before. It's gaping quite a bit at the neck edge, and it's like, I'm not filling up the cups this way. Like my bust is too small for this. However, if I take this and pinch it at the center back, and then just kind of rearrange my boobs a little bit, a lot more lifted, I get a little bit more cleavage. There's no gaping at the side where the cups lay, so just pulling this back is really helping with the fit quite a bit. So I'm gonna see how much that is, and this is like not really the best way to do this and like check for fit, but because I'm alone and I don't have somebody to help me out with these fittings, this is just how it's gotta be. Okay, so that's all my alterations for actual fit. I obviously like can't just hold this shut the whole time, but I know that like that will help with the fit a lot, and now I can make more design based choices. So for the hip line, I have it pretty low. It's like way down at my high hip, so this is where my hip bone is. I did that on purpose so that I can use this pattern for other things in the future, and so that I had plenty of space to play around with where I want this to sit. For her design though, it really doesn't sit anywhere near the high hip. It goes almost to the waist, so I'm gonna say about where I popped that seam open is pretty good while I'm making all these alterations, because it's hard to make everything really even when I'm marking things on myself. I'm just gonna mark that my left side is the correct side that I should take these design alterations from, because this, I don't know what's going on there. For fit alterations, you want to make it as even on both sides as you can, and then you can take the average of those measurements when you're actually doing the pattern alterations. For design alterations, you can really just mark up one side of the body and that will be totally fine. These markings are not going to change the shape or the fit at all. They're just reference points for making your design changes. So in the design, hers goes to about here. I have three options. First option, do it just like at a normal neckline length and disregard the design. Option 1. The second option is to take it that really low and use a like mesh insert to keep everything kind of sitting where it's supposed to. And the last option is to forgo the insert, but that is bad. That'll make everything pull apart, so we don't want that. Oh, I guess the third option is that I could get a V wire. So these are wires that you find a lot in bra making, but it's just a little wire that will keep this all rigid, and it kind of eliminates the need for a mesh support in any of those gaps. I think I don't want it to go all the way down. That seems kind of like a pain, but maybe to here. I think even if it's like here, if it's not super wide, it should still function okay. Oh, I forgot to mention the other option for the bust. If you don't want to take it in more, then you can always add these guys. It's like not so much the look that I'm going for anymore is like really anime boob. I used to go for that a lot, and it's not what I'm going for lately. But personal preference, you can do either. If you don't want to deal with alterations as much, try adding cutlets. Everything's looking like it fits a lot more from all sides. So previously when I was turning to the side like this is still gaping because I couldn't pull that in, but it was making me look really blocky from top to bottom. But now that I've released the pressure of my hips, that's kind of given me the space I need around here, and shows that shows my curves a little bit more. So cool. I think the back also looks like it fits better that way too. Basically everything fits better if you give yourself space for your hips. Let's go make some alterations to this pattern, I guess. Alright, so the first thing that I'm going to do for these alterations is measure how wide this ended up going. So from about 3 inches below, 2.5 inches below the waist, 1 3/4, 3 inches below the waist, down to 2 inches, 1 3/4. So I said 2.5 inches below the waist. We are at 1 3/4. So divided by 2 so that I can split it between these two is going to be 7/8. The next alteration I had was that the crotch was just altogether too wide. I wanted to lower the neckline, so I did that on this side, and it looks like once I get to the side back seam, that's about 1 3/4, and that kind of scoops up to meet this bone. I need 1 3/8 out of the bust horizontal total, or on the half. I need 1 inch out of the underbust, and then I need 3/4 inch out of the waist. So for 3/4 of an inch, I could do 1/2 inch on these three. Do 1/8 there, and 1/8 there, so that I can just blend in from up here. Okay, so the bust is where it's a little bit trickier because I don't want to take a whole bunch out of the front of the bust because that fit really well. So mostly I'm gonna have to take it out of these two seams. I need to take 1 3/8 out, so that's a lot to put into 2 seams. Let's do 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch on each of those for now. But then I have another 3/8 I need to get rid of. Another 1/8 here, I think. That seems like it'll go fairly smoothly. Another 1/8 here seems like it'll curve it in a lot. Same with here and here. So maybe I want to take that extra 1/4 off of here. Now that I've got my pattern all altered with regards to fit, I need to do some alterations for design. But because I want to be able to use this in the future, I'm going to transfer this pattern to some sturdier paper, and then I can just do the design alterations directly onto this paper. The main alterations we're making for design are lifting the hip line and lowering the front neckline. I'm just reusing the pieces of the mock-up that I had that I showed in the fitting, but this one, the fabric was a lot lighter because I guess part of the dye didn't take in the fabric, so I just need to redo a boning channel on this before I can stick it to everything else. To do the boning channels, I just mark a vertical line and then I lay this tape across it. This is Prussian tape, and this just makes for really nice flat boning channels that are really sturdy. It does shrink though, so you need to pre-shrink it with the iron, just stick a lot of steam on it and you'll see it contract. It's very interesting to watch. This is what it looks like stitched on. I just caught the edge. And this is also what I'll be using to cover all of the seams when I do the boning channels on the seams. For the center back zipper, I'm just gonna stitch the center back seam like a normal seam, except I'm gonna do it on a wider basting stitch. Then I can just stick the zipper into that seam and then seam rip it. still got the back and like the whole rest of the bodysuit separate, and I did the boning channels covering the seams before I joined them together just because it's easier to do before it becomes like a tube. So now I'm going to join the rest of the seams. I'll do one side first and then do the boning channel like cover on that one, and then I'll do the last one. Second fitting, I think I might have taken it in just a little bit too much because it is a little bit, oops, my hair is in the way. It's a little bit tighter than I want it to be, like especially up at the top where it's kind of muffin topping. I'm holding the center front here because I did find my little V-shaped insert for bras. So I'm gonna use that to hold this together because it was splaying out quite a lot. However, it's not officially like sewn in here. So the force of the two cups wanting to go separately is kind of pushing it down. So I'm trying to hold it up so it keeps the right shape. I think that I made it a little bit too tight up top here. And I also think I made it maybe a little bit too low. So I think I'm gonna just release all of the stitching here so that I can lift everything up a bit. So now I've lifted all that up, and I think that helps quite a bit actually. Like that's definitely keeping it from muffin topping quite as much, and that's also giving a little bit more support around the front. So in my patterning video, I talked about how you don't want the back to go too far down because that'll just kind of eliminate all the support you have at the front because it won't like have enough to pull against. So by raising that, I think that helped a bit, and it also keeps my back fat from squishing out. The other thing was that I cut this way too far in here. So I've released this seam allowance here so that this comes out a little bit more. Before it was like here, and this is just like not the look I'm going for. Ideally, it would come out even more and like fill in this hole there, but this is what I cut, so we're just gonna go with that. Back like on the butt is pretty good. So if I were to let that go farther out, I guess wider does look a little bit better. So I think I will let it out to the point where the seam allowance is, but when it's up at the hip here, so between these two panels basically, I'm gonna leave it how I have it stitched up like this, and then from this panel down and then this panel down, I'm gonna let it out to where the seam allowance is. The thing is, I think that I may have shortened like the in-between, like where the crotch seam is a little bit too much, because I feel like this is maybe sitting a little too low. Everything feels like it's sitting lower than it should be. I'm gonna let out the crotch seam down there like maybe a 1/2 inch total, just so that everything feels a little bit more like it's sitting properly. Look straight at my butt. It's like wrinkling right here, and I think that might be because it's just all getting forced lower than it needs to be. And then I think that's pretty much it. A little bit too small is actually pretty okay. The coutil that I use is not like super rigid. It will loosen up a little bit and like expand. Not a ton, because coutil is supposed to be a very stable fabric, but this stuff that I like to use is a little bit softer than the really rigid stuff that you mostly find places. I was looking at the neckline again, and I think that maybe I want to raise the neckline. So I think maybe more like this would be a little better. And then I think maybe I will add mesh or something in there to hold this up, because I don't know that this is going to do so well when the neckline is a lot higher. It doesn't seem to be supporting quite as much. So if I pull like this, then it will lift everything up a little bit more. To approximate where I want this mesh to sit, I'm just gonna grab a piece of twill tape and pin it so that I know what the distance between these two should be. Just kind of brought the whole bust area up. So if I unpin it, you can see that it kind of projects outward more rather than when it's pinned, it keeps it more lifted. Cool, I think that's pretty much it. So basically the alterations that I'm gonna be making are, I'm going to pull this out to where the cut line is, same with along the back here. I'm raising the neckline from the center back all the way up to about the princess line, just to where the cut edge is, and then I'll blend that in. And then I'm gonna stick some mesh in here. Basically for finishing, all I've got left to do is to bind off these edges and add that mesh in there. Now that I've gotten boning back in all of these channels, I'm gonna close the tops of all the channels off, and I'm gonna do that by doing a double stitch. So I'll do one like right above the bone and then another one 1/4 inch away, and that'll just give extra security so that these bones don't wear through and pop out. Normally to bind off the top edge of these and like the leg edge, I would use a ribbon and just fold it over the top, but because I don't have any ribbon that's this color since I dyed the fabric, I'm going to just use this same Prussian tape To do the binding, stitch it to the very edge of the top here and then fold it over so that the front has a really nice clean edge without any of the binding showing, and then the back will just look like this. Everything's all done. The last thing that I'm going to do is put the little mesh thing in the V right there. I didn't end up using my V like wire. I just extended the boning up through into like the sweetheart neckline. The mesh doesn't fray at all, so I've just stitched it right over there, and I'm just going to trim it down now. That's it. That's the whole thing. This is what it looks like when it's completely done. All of the edges are finished. I've got this little mesh guy in here, and normally I would do this in a mesh that matches my skin tone, but because I'm going to be gray and this is going to get black mesh over it and also under it, I decided to use more black mesh, so that'll blend in a little bit better. You have some white from the binding peeking out here, and I don't love that, but it'll be fine. It's gonna get covered up with lace and sequins and stuff. Other things that could be improved, so if you look right here, it's a little bit loose. Should have pulled the binding a little bit tighter around here. I've started pulling it tight kind of at this seam. I should have started it a little bit earlier, and that would make it hug closer to my butt a little bit better. I might need to eventually replace this mesh because it's not the same kind of mesh that I normally use. The kind of mesh that I normally use is called Italian tulle, and it's very stable. This has a little bit of stretch to it, so I'm not sure if that will eventually give out. Pretty easy to replace because it's not sewn into any seams, it's just sewn on top. So that's the end of the video. I hope you guys liked this series. I hope it was informative. If you have any questions, if I missed anything, let me know, and I'll maybe make a fourth video about corset bodies and cover anything that I might have missed. And then thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. The first 1,000 people to click the link in my description will get a 1-month free trial, so you guys should check them out. Learn some other things besides corsetry. Or also learn corsetry. I think they've got classes on that too. And if you make your own corset body and you post it on social media anywhere, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, please tag me or message me, let me know so I can see it. I'd love to see what you guys create based off of my videos. You guys have tagged me in some stuff on Instagram, and I always look at them. I might not always interact because I kind of get so caught up in doing work and everything, but I do look at all of them, and I really love seeing the work you guys do based off of mine. It's very sweet. So if you make your own, let me know. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, let me know. If you hated this video, let me know. Yes, let me know how I could improve. And if you want to see the rest of my Raven costume come together and just like generally the other stuff I do, then hit the subscribe button. I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye!